Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to IT Psychological Therapy 101. Oh, sorry, you're not in the wrong session. No, this is the DevOps Deep Dive. There's just one hitch that we need to get over, which is I can see what's on my screen, but it's not changing up here. So I think we might have to give Joe just a minute to see why that's happening. Sir, this isn't changing. It's changing on the laptop, but not on the main screen. Let me see if I could change the input here.
Did you turn it off and turn it back on again?
Oh, sounds like a Microsoft product. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, this is a Dell laptop. I think we should be good. All right. So while Joe is mentioning that, I'll tell you why I mentioned psychology, because I was on an interview once just recently where we're hiring people into our team. And the person who showed up, had shown up from, a psychologist's office. Like, they used to work at a psychologist. And I was curious, like, hey, what prompted you to go from psychiatry into professional services at VMware? And they were like, well, you just can't get it right when you work for a psychologist. Because if you show up early, you're passive aggressive. If you show up late, you're triggering. And if you show up on time for work, you're compulsive. So there was no way I could win, so that's why he figured he'd show up to work at VMware. So speaking of VMware, my name is Mitesh Pancholi, and I've been with VMware for the last 10 years as a number of different positions. Started in product management, then went to R&D, and I managed, our worldwide developers across Asia, across Europe, across Americas. And then finally, I got tired of the customers screaming at me every 6 months saying, Mitesh, your product sucks because of these PRs. And I figured, let's meet the customer on day one, which is the moment you sign a SOW, one of us shows up, right, which is a professional services person. And I'm a principal in the cloud practice. There are two of us across the United States. So what we're going to talk about today, once this display system starts working, is the DevOps deep dive, right? So let's have a quick show of hands. How many folks here in the room are from our traditional customer base, which has been, the IT operator as well as, infrastructure maintaining team? Let's have a show of hands. Wonderful. Most of you. Absolutely nice. And then how about folks who are, a new customer for us or have been developing customers for us, which are the actual developers, right? Writing code for either infrastructure engineering or writing code for applications. Let's have a show of hands. Great. Awesome. We've identified who you are. So thank you. So that's what this talk is going to talk about, right? Which is how do we merge both of these together and make each other's lives easier, while at the same time empowering a lot of the IT folks, so that way, are you guys getting a lot of reverb? Okay. Hello? Okay. How about now? Good? Awesome. Thank you. And empowering a lot of the IT folks, so that way, you can continue doing all the amazing work you're doing and actually start opening up bandwidth for you to be able to support a lot of the new development features. We're also going to have a live demo, so 99% of the time that fails and crashes and burns and everybody laughs at my expense, but I'm hoping that doesn't happen this time. So we'll have that, and we'll fire that up as we're going through the discussion. So let's see if the slides move forward. Quick disclaimer. All right, this isn't going to happen, so let me just try one more time. Sorry, folks. Typically, we don't have these issues. It's just I have a second laptop, so I think that's causing some issues on the developer side. It's changing here. I don't know which laptop this is, Joe, because yeah, so is this one. But the thing is, it's okay. Yeah, that's the right one. All right, maybe it was locked into something. PowerPoint. All right, let's see if second time's a charm. Beautiful. Yep, great. So in terms of the deep dive, I've split it up into 4 different items, right? One is the overview, so that way when your management comes back and says, hey, you went to VMworld, what did you come back with for DevOps? So you have some slides you can take pictures of that shows you how the overview is like. After that, I'm going to kick off the demo, because the demo takes between 15 and 20 minutes to really run through, and I'll show you what that is. And then the landscape in terms of, you know, what's out there, because let's have a frank discussion, right? How many folks are here because, you know, management is pushing a lot of DevOps onto their plate saying, hey, yeah, bingo, yeah, many people, right? Or it's creeping onto your radar, so that way you might be responsible for it in 6 to 12 months. Well, we're here to help you, lots of different ways. Feel free to take as many photos as you'd like, you know, and if you'd like the session deck, there are ways to get it right after VMworld. And as a recap, I have, you know, a quick 10 point list that you can go out with, which are, you know, what are the highlights of DevOps and how can you start using it yourself with the existing VMware technologies you've bought. Quick show of hands, how many people here have used vSphere CLIs, command line interfaces? Wonderful, so you're in the right room. How about vRealize Orchestrator? Great, many of you. vRealize Automation? Perfect, dude, we're in the right room after all. Okay, so, you know, I get to a lot of customers and they keep asking me, Mitesh, what is DevOps, right? So at the end of the day, you know, DevOps is basically the virtuous life cycle between planning, developing, and operating and release managing infrastructure as well as applications that live on that infrastructure, right? So that way you can have your infrastructure as predictable as, you know, ordering pizza from Pizza Hut, for example, right? You've ordered a cheese pizza with pineapple and, I don't know, ham on the side, and then it shows up 30 minutes later hot and, you know, ready to eat, and it's predictable, right? You order it in Boston, you order it in San Francisco, it's the same thing. Same thing with Amazon, you know, web services, right? As well as Azure and Google and VMware. What we want to be able to do is empower you to give the other half, the other half in your team, which is your developers, you know, in your team, to be able to say, give me a RHEL 7.2, give me a Win2K16, give me a, you know, Win2K12 XYZ, right? So that way when they ask for it, they know what they're getting and they're getting that repeatable, simple, scalable infrastructure, so they're not bothering you at 3 in the morning saying, hey, you know, you didn't apply the patch or yum updates don't work, right? So that's what we want to do. In terms of the in-depth parts of DevOps, you know, there's a whole bunch of lifecycle items, right? So typically product managers will go ahead and plan and say, hey, you know, I want to push out a brand new feature, I'm going to plan it, and then I'm going to ask the developer to develop it, who's going to code, build, test it, and they're going to throw it over the wall sometimes, and you're going to get it in operations, and you're going to deploy it, manage it, and monitor it, right? And if something goes wrong, you're going to go back and forth. So what we want to do is have a consolidated pipeline that does all of this magic for you, rather than having 20 different tools to manage everything, right? So quick understanding in terms of, you know, coding. There are a lot of folks here who've definitely coded on the CLI side of the house, as well as if you're a traditional developer, you'll use something like JetBrains, or you'll use Eclipse, or you'll use PHP Storm, right? What will happen is once you've done that, you'll go into the build phase. So you'll use Jenkins, or you might check into something like Git. How many folks here have been using Jenkins and Git on a daily basis? Okay, there are a few of you. How many of you have heard about it or are going to start encountering it in the next year? A lot more. Awesome. So we have some sessions for you later on as well that you can go to, where they'll empower you on how to use Jenkins correctly, how to use Git appropriately, and how Subversion works correctly, right? But our gist from VMware is that we want to line up all of these for you, so that way you can use your existing VRA, VRO, CLI, right? All the VMware tools that you bought and you've staked your career on can be used to basically build out this pipeline and make you, you know, that rock star in front of your management, so that way you can start delivering DevOps, right? Especially DevOps as a service, and which we'll get into that in just a second. If you look at the industry norm of what DevOps is, it's this thing, right? There are multiple forces that are driving this ship, right? They want to ship products, they want to ship patches. Typically, you know, developer comes in and says, great, I have this brand new feature. I'll use case in point, one of the biggest banks on the planet, top 5, that's been one of my customers lately. And we helped them with a DevOps initiative where, you know, they were trying to get code shipped out as quickly as possible, so that way they can securitize their infrastructure, they can offer new applications, they can offer new features. So if you're in Boston, which is where I'm from, you can fire up your, you know, little device and say, hey, where's the nearest ATM for me that has more than $2,000, for example, right? Or I want to pay for this particular coffee at this cafe using your particular application. So developers always want to, you know, ship out product. Operations wants to make sure that the production environment is safe and steady, right? Because if it isn't, you are going to be the one who's going to get called at 3 in the morning on a Saturday saying, great, welcome to the morning, but now you've got to go ahead and fix all these problems because the steady state has been broken, right? Beyond that, compliance comes into play, especially at banks, at pharmaceuticals, at finance companies, as well as DoD customers, where they're like, when you ship this product, you better be ready that it's compliant to our export quality controls, as well as PCI or SSD, right? How many of you day to day have to be involved in making sure compliance is adhered to? Let's have a quick show of hands. Wow, a lot of you. So this is going to definitely impact you. Beyond that, the testing team gets involved, right? And I feel bad for this team because they always get the short end of the stick. The developers get the code ready, they want to push it out to ops, but before they do, they need to have the QA team, give that check mark of all the regression tests. And the QA team has basically a weekend to do, hundreds and hundreds of regression tests. So they always push back and say, no, we're not ready. We want to have a week or two before we deliver it, right? Beyond that, the security team definitely gets involved, and I've seen this probably the security side of the house probably on a monthly basis, if not every 2 weeks, right? And here's the use case, and raise your hand when you've seen this movie before. So somebody pushes code out to production, and 3 to 5 days later, production code stops working. Why? Because the database connection is broken. Why? Because the security team went ahead and changed the service account without telling anybody on a 45-day rotation. And now that the database is broken, every other application that relies on that database is broken. How many of you seen that movie before? Bingo, great. So we can help you, eliminate as much of that problem as possible. So, that's the gist of it. A lot of the slide basically plays out to, what happens when the second order effects of when these ships collide, right? So for example, application deployment time grows, complexity grows. Your job becomes a nightmare because now you have to maintain the spaghetti code of infrastructure as well as spaghetti code of the development code that was given to you, right? And we want to help you eliminate as much as that possible. If you do this right, what's the shiny carrot and what's this promised land at the end of the rainbow? It's this thing, right? Which is the best keep getting better and better. So I've certainly had customers who've, once they've adopted the DevOps framework as a service, which we'll get into, have been able to push code out hundreds of times a week, right? Across the entire ecosystem we spoke about, as well as they're able to go ahead and experiment. And from an IT perspective, they're able to go back to their management and say, great, we're not just a cost center that is doing these 5 things. We're actually an innovation center, right? That's able to do multiple things. You want to do database as a service? We'll go ahead and work with that, right? As long as it goes through our DevOps pipeline, right? Or you want to go ahead and update all the images so that way the heartbleed bug doesn't occur quickly? We'll be able to quickly help you there, right? So that's what I've seen as DevOps so far in the field, right? And we've done this at hundreds of customers. Personally, I've probably done it at about 12 to 24 different customers in terms of helping them roll out the technology and the process of DevOps. So we'll get into the details there. Has anybody heard anything else that is DevOps that their management has brought up to them or industry's brought up to them? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? Okay. All right, we'll get into what DevOps is not in just a quick sec. The other thing is, why do we need DevOps, right? So you might want to take a picture of this slide, which is here are the early adopters that VMware has worked with. And I've worked with many of these companies where they've basically taken their vSphere and VMware investment and leveraged it towards getting a DevOps pipeline going, right? To align all of that stuff, which is your code pipeline, your check-in pipeline, your build pipeline, your configuration management, your testing, your deployment, your push out to firewalls, as well as feeding back to product management. And some of these customers have done it at a really spectacular level. So a good example would be Coca-Cola, right? How many folks here love, Yellow Mellow from the 80s? Okay, I'm dating myself. There you go. Thank you, sir. Basically, it's a soda that was only sold in the 80s and doesn't exist anymore, except for when you go to Coca-Cola, the freestyle machines. Those big boxes you see at movie theaters where you can go in and punch in what you want? Well, guess who runs a lot of that MDM? It's VMware. And guess who manages a lot of that DevOps cycle, right? So that way, if the Coke machine starts running out of syrup, it knows what are the traps that it needs to set throughout the entire VMware ecosystem, so that way the syrup gets refreshed. So when you want to go and watch Avengers Age of Ultron, you've got a nice cold Coke or a Yellow Mellow, right, available for you to use. Okay, so then one thing you might want to go back with, and I'll just, push this slide out so that way we can get to the demo section quickly, is what is not DevOps, right? The critical thing for you to remember is DevOps is not something you just build and you throw away. It's something that you do with the tools that you're given, right? And I'll show you a little bit more about what that looks like at good customers, or a lot of our customers, but it's just not saying, hey, release management, or we're doing service catalog, or we're doing continuous integration using CI/CD pipelines. Or my favorite is that when management just shows up and says, well, you're the NetSec team, but henceforth you're going to be the DevOps team. And then the customers come to me and say, Mitesh, what am I supposed to do? My title's changed. I might have gotten some money out of it, but at the end of the day, I don't know what I'm doing, right? From a DevOps perspective. So we can definitely help you there. And then the key thing to remember is it's not just the automation tools to tackle the problem. It's also the process changes, right? You have to force the company to evolve, and you are that change agent that is going to help you do that, or the company do that. And in process, you're going to become this amazing, valued employee. Not that you already aren't, but you're going to become more valuable because you're seen as that change agent to help the company evolve, right? So that's what DevOps is not. Results, I'm going to skip over for a quick sec because I want to get to the, I'll show you what they are later. But, okay, and this is the wrong slide deck. We'll work with it. The other things that we want to get to were the demo itself. So before I show you more DevOps detail and show you more architecture slides, how many people would actually like to see a hands-on demo, right? It working. Great. All right, by popular demand, we're going to switch to that. And by the way, any point in time you have questions, feel free to stop me. This is a very interactive discussion. I don't want to be hogging the stage and just telling you. Instead, it's a two-way discussion. Okay, so let me lay the groundwork for you a little bit. In order for your DevOps to work correctly, your coding, your build pipeline, your Jenkins, your GitHub, as well as the actual hypervisor on which your workload is running, right? If it's vSphere, if it's Azure on the other side, Google or Amazon, they all have to be synced up, including configuration management. So to illustrate that, what we've done is I've got my vCenter out here, and as you can see, I've got a pretty light load of VMs running. But then what we've done at VMware PSO is across all of our, ignore the AWS integration, that's not supposed to be shown yet. I know Pat talked about it this morning, but I shouldn't be showing it to the customers just yet. But what we've done is we built a couple of workflows, and for those who have been using VRO, this should look familiar, right? It's your normal workflow schema. And what PSO has done, Professional Services at VMware, is we've gone through and we've built workflows for all of these integrations that you're going to have to use and do when you start lining up your DevOps pipeline, right? So things like Garrett, things like Jenkins, things like monitoring, endpoints like DigitalOcean, endpoints like Amazon, Azure, Google. So we've gone ahead and integrated across the REST APIs for all of them. And what we're saying is when you engage PSO, we will bring these workflows with us for you. We will train you on how to use them, and then you maintain them and look like the rock star that you are, okay? So to illustrate that, what I've done is on the public GitHub website, and you can inspect this code yourself. If you go to github.com/mpancholi-vmw, you'll see all of the repositories that I've got running that are public. And on that, I have a demo runbook. And the demo runbook is a very straightforward Node.js application that has your three-tier architecture, right? Your web server, your database, your middle tier logic, and your database in the backend, right? Very simple. And I'm making it simple so that way we can illustrate the development pipeline for this. So what I could do is I could basically use PHP Storm, and you'll see when it boots up that it's going to load up all the code here. And the application is pretty straightforward. It just is a runbook that keeps track of what are you supposed to do when you want to build out a data center, right? Something very simple. I didn't want to build out an IPAM. I didn't want to build out a change ticket system because that would be more complex, whereas a simple to-do list or a demo runbook is easy to understand. So let's let that allow that. So while that's doing it, I'm going to go ahead and make a quick change so that way you can see that I'm not just making this up. Okay, hello buddy, what happened? Okay, my laptop just died. Give me 1 second, John and ladies. Sorry, this is turning into a comedy of errors today. Joe, is there a... Okay, and he's gone too. Perfect. Wow. All right. Oh, thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Sorry about that, folks. I think today has been one of those days, Groundhog Day. But all right, it's juicing up. So while it's doing that, I'll tell you, basically there are a couple of different things that you need to integrate, right? You need your GitHub integration done, which we'll show you. You need integration with your Eclipse or PHP Storm, which we'll show you. And then you need your integration with vSphere done, which we'll show you as well as soon as this thing boots up. So in the meantime, being the consummate professional I am, I'm going to switch back to my marketing slides. All right, let's see if that comes up. Come on. Okay, let's just do that. Perfect. And here we go. Back on the horse. All right. So in terms of the details, while my laptop boots up and we get back to the demo, there are a couple of things that are involved, right? There are three main parties involved in this, which are the business leadership, Mr. Monty Burns here with the money that's funneling all of our expenses and our salaries and everything. And there's the dev side and then the ops side, right, of the house. And each of them has a specific instance of what they want to work on. So for example, from business leader perspective, what the business leader wants to see is that, software is the key differentiator for them. And they want to make that, they want to push out as much of that as possible. The problem is that right now delivering it is very slow, as well as a lot of the teams for software delivery are very matrixed. And because of that, there is a lot of integration points at the friction. So for example, the NetSec team, the storage team versus the vSphere team versus the coding team, they're all working together, but not as good as they can be with each other, right? Beyond that, the operations team, unfortunately, is seen as a bottleneck. And it's unfortunate because you aren't the bottleneck. You just happen to be the last person who touches the ball before it goes into the goal, and because of that, you're blamed. So we want to help you from that. And then also, they want to make sure that no bugs make it into production. So they want to control that as much as possible, because that delays software. And once software gets delayed, your delivery velocity goes down, and your friction coefficient goes up, which means loss of revenue. And once that starts happening, we know what's coming down the pipe. They're going to start doing cost-cutting measures, right? So we want to control that as much as possible, or help out controlling that as much as possible. So let me just see if this thing is coming back up in the meantime. And I could tell you about the developer perspective, because there are two camps involved here, right? So the developer perspective is very straightforward. Their MBOs, which is management by objectives, are driven by how many features they put out, which is diametrically opposite to what the operations team wants to do in production, which is control the number of features in a predictable manner. Beyond that, they want to deliver features as quickly as they can. They want to develop systems that differ from production. Unfortunately, that's true. How many developers here, really develop on a system that's similar to production, right? Not many. Most of them says, oh, it works on my laptop, now it's your problem. So we want to cut that out. And then they also want to be able to assume a lot of things, right? Developers do this a lot, and I can attest to that because, I've been a developer for all my life, which is I'll assume that the network, the storage, the performance and firewall issues just don't exist, right? That I'll assume that I have a 10 gig network, I have a 2 terabyte hard drive, and then all ports on my laptop are open, so the same thing should happen in production, right? How many of you have heard that from developers? Bingo. So we want to keep them in that dreamland and say, yeah, that's the case, buddy. And this is what ends up happening, which is, they come back and say, oh yeah, it works nice in development, but now it's your problem. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. True. Yes. No, absolutely. So I don't know if you had a chance to go to Tom Height's discussion right before this discussion, but I'll be more than happy to take that answer offline and tell you the other session, because we can't compare, SecOps as well as SRE in this discussion, right? Otherwise, it'll be a DevSec SRE Ops deep dive, and we'll be here for like 2 days. But you're absolutely right. SRE as well as Sec and Comp has to be part of that discussion. We're hoping that the operations IT, and I've seen this really work in real life, because once the operations team takes hold of that and says, I'm this nexus of the storm, they can be empowered to talk to the Sec team, the SRE team, the storage team, the network team, everybody, and say, you need to confine and deliver to these SLAs. And then that gives them the power, right? Rather than a distributed team where everybody has the same power and one person making the wrong decision impacts everybody else. But that's part of the OTS services that we offer, right? And we can definitely help there. So how do we avoid this problem? Getting back to this, if I've answered your question, is how do we avoid this problem, right? Which is it works fine on my laptop, now it's your problem, buddy. Well, we have to look at the operations side of the house, right? And see what their perspective is. And this is your perspective, basically, or majority of your perspective, which is, the MBOs are tied to system stability. It's not about how many features you get out. The application deployment and maintenance is very complex, right? Because who puts out a hello world, demo runbook application in production? Not many people do. Most applications are about, ATM transaction processing or health record processing or a lot of the day-to-day challenges you see. So it's complex. The big problem is that you're drinking from a fire hose of code changes, right? A typical IT person will have to deal with a patch that's coming down from the OS team, a network change that's coming around from the NetSec team, right? A storage vSAN upgrade, for example, that's coming down from the storage team, and then somebody will go ahead and update vSphere behind their scenes. So you're essentially drinking all these code changes in, and we want to help you with that. And then also the complicated deployment path and frequent production patching, right? So all of this adds up to a lot of issues on your side of the house. And why does this actually propound the problem? Well, here's the reason why. Because when you go to any company and you say, hey, how many technologies are you, Mr. IT, or you, Ms. Developer, using, right? This is what you see. And this is pulled from one of my customers, right? When I go to customers and I show the slide, and very frequently I said, how many of these technologies in DevOps are you using? For example, doing cloud tools with Rackspace or VMware, doing DevOps technologies with CoreOS or CF Engine, Puppet, and Chef, managing operating systems or databases or API technologies. What do you think they say? Anybody? Bingo. They say, most of the customers say, oh, I'm using all of these, or they come back and say, you're actually missing a couple that we are using, right? And this is a pretty fresh slide. So that's what we want to do, is we want to take this complexity and marry it with what we call DevOps as a framework as a service, and be able to deliver a lot of these things, I'm going to go back just in a sec, on the existing vSphere platform that you've already invested in, using the existing vSphere skills you already have, right? So what does that really look like? Well, let's pull this up for a second. I'm tired of the slide building here. It's this one. So it basically takes all of these different applications that we talked about at the top, marries it with what Pat and a lot of our leadership team has been talking about, which is the VCF, right? vCloud Foundation, NSX, vSphere, vSAN, as well as VRA on top of that, right? So that way you can take your SDDC investment with VRO, married with the REST APIs, SOAP APIs, CLIs that are positioned by all these technologies, and put out something that we call DevOps Framework as a Service. And what does that actually do? Well, that tool basically, or that platform, DevOps Framework as a Service, does the first thing, which is it authenticates and starts taking ownership of authentication around the ecosystem, right? So this should look pretty familiar to you guys. You have your vCenter locked down in your Fortress with your ESX. And then on top of that, you'll have our VIDM engaged, right? That does the SSO. And then the SSO basically acts like a train line where each of our 60 products, by the way, if you didn't know, VMware sells 60 plus products, right? Integrate at the SSO level. And then what we do is when we need to go out and punch into the other parts of the DevOps ecosystem, for example, with VRA, NSX, or VRO, man, I really need to build this out faster. We punch out using VRO. And then VRO will talk REST, SSH, SMTP, PowerShell, talk to AD, it'll talk to VC, it'll talk to F5, you name it, right? So that way, eventually, when you've built this out, you've got all those technologies we talked about up ahead being consumed through a single pane of authentication glass, right? That's the first part of this offering. And that's pretty powerful because otherwise, outside of this, you're going to have to either do it through AD groupings, or if you're doing Amazon, you're probably going to have to do it through IAM, or if you're building your own with Oracle, you'll have to do it with Access Central. There are lots of other vendors, right? So this is the first part of the offering. Now, the way it marries the rest of the offering is that it allows us to do consolidated orchestration. That bottom piece should look familiar to you, right? Which is the code, build, test, deploy, manage, monitor, lifecycle. But what we do is using the DevOps orchestration bus through our VRO, we basically marry together virtualization, container management, security, right? The thing that the gentleman mentioned earlier, with infrastructure as a service, configuration management through Ansible, Chef, Puppet, SaltStack, Gugent, as well as logging, monitoring, VIO, doing QA. So all of that, comes together in this final form, which is the DevOps framework as a service. All right, buddy, let's go. What's going on here? There we go. So this is essentially our main offering, right, for helping you from a tool as well as a process perspective for DevOps frameworks, right? We integrate with planning stacks such as Trello, Redmine, GitHub Pages, and then we orchestrate this entire life cycle here, right? So a developer checks in code, we integrate with Atom or Eclipse or PHP Storm, all using vRealize Orchestrator, that's familiar to you, all targeting SDDC as well as AWS, as well as targeting IBM Blueshift. And then we integrate all the little hops that have to happen in order for somebody to check in code and you to push it into test QA. So for example, somebody checks in code into Atom, we're able to take that and push that into Garrett for code review using VRO. Then Garrett basically pushes to Jenkins for doing a build. Jenkins, once the build is done, it'll push it to Selenium and say, test this code for me. And based on whether or not the code passes regression tests, we can go ahead and create, using CodeStream or VRA, the entire infrastructure, which is your virtual machine or your vApps or the NSX switches that need to be, or vSAN fabric that needs to be cut, all of that in an automated way. And then we also integrate that endpoint, so when it fires up, when Windows fires up, Linux fires up, we're able to take Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Chocolatey, in case you're doing Windows, or Gugent, and be able to configure that VM or that collection of VMs in the right way, so that way when the application boots up, it's a well-formed VM, it's a well-formed application. And once that's done, we're able to push that into the commit stack with VROPS and VRLI, so that way we're able to monitor what the application performance looks like, and also able to tell you if somebody's opened up port 22, for example, on SSH, right? Or somebody's surreptitiously pinging port 3306 for MySQL, and alert you to say, hey, you might have somebody on your hands who's sniffing your network, right? So you might want to lock it down. And then finally, a lot of that gets integrated into Slack and issues, GitHub issues. And where this really helps everybody that I've seen at development, the DevOps deployments, is people start pushing code, and then they eventually get an update from Slack saying, hey, Mitesh pushed a brand new piece of code, or Joe pushed a brand new piece of code, and it's regressing, right? So go ahead and resatisfy the production environment. So that's what the DevOps framework as a service looks like for us. Any questions about how this actually works behind the scenes? Because I'm going to show you what it actually does. All right, everybody's on the same page. Wonderful. So now let's try our demo, which is what I wanted to show you originally and kick it off because it's going to take 20 minutes, but the laptop died. And then we'll go into 10 minutes of what the takeaways are like. So let me show you the demo actually. And where we were was right here, where we had GitHub opened, and I was about to check in some basic code. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way. And here's the application that I was talking to you about earlier, right? And this is the Node Package Manager application that I have. It's a very simple application. All it does is it goes ahead and lists out the tasks that I want. And if you want to see what this code looks like right now, go ahead to mpenchally VMW at GitHub, and you'll be able to see it. So what we'll do is we'll go into the code here, and I'm live editing code, so caveat emptor. We're just going to go in here, and we're going to fire up a couple of things, including my public index HPPP. There we go. That all looks good. I'm just trying to make sure that we don't have anything crazy happening here before we get into the actual execution of the code. Let me just make sure I've got the right project open. Demo runbook. How many folks here actually end up doing coding day to day? Let's just have a quick show of hands. Node Package Manager coders, anybody? All right, we'll meet offline then. So it's a fairly straightforward application. It's got a public-facing folder. It's got some routes, which basically lay out everything. And it's got a few different views. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, welcome to VMworld PSO team, or we'll just say VMworld 2017. We'll commit that. So now as a developer, pretend that I'm a developer. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to Git and I'm going to say I want to go ahead and commit the entire directory. It's going to come in and say, hey, you went ahead and made some changes. That's fine. I'll go ahead and commit and push. And the proof that I'm not making this up can be seen here. If you go to the page, you'll see there are 31 commits. And if you look at the commits now, you'll see that there were 32 commits. The most recent one was the one that I just did right now, right? And if you want to diff it, you are able to diff it right here. And you could see the changes that I made. So anyways, I've gone ahead and made that change as a developer. Now let's put the other shoe on, which is as a developer, I'm ready to push my code. Now I want you, Mr. or Miss IT, to push this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up vCOadmin. Because okay, let me just make sure I'm on the right network here. What I typically end up doing is I'll have a trap that's set up here on GitHub that the moment the number of commits increases, I will go ahead and fire up Jenkins, and I'll go ahead and fire up GitHub, and I'll go ahead and fire up Selenium, so all of the things that we talked about work appropriately, right? And let's make sure this is done. Oh, okay, what's my master password? All right, let's see if I'm able to, all right. Okay. Great. Today's been a really interesting day for demos. All right, screw it. I'm going to pretend like, let's pretend as if the password worked. Sorry. I don't know what happened. I walked into this place and like the laptop doesn't connect and then it dies and then I have to switch using manual methods and the passwords are not validating. There's some hex on this room today, so I hope you'll forgive me with that. By the way, I do have this recorded on YouTube, so if you'd like to see it on YouTube, I'd be more than happy to show it to you. Believe me, I'm not doing any smoke and mirrors here. All right, so let me show you what we have, right? We were talking about the demo, and I'll kick it off and I'll show you what it actually does. So if you go to VMware DevOps and overall workflow, and I'm going to go ahead and kick off my runbook demo. So let's go here. And I'm going to say kick this off, and we're going to say this is the VMworld 2017 prefix. Go ahead and submit this. So what happens now behind the scenes is that my vCenter server basically gets that request, and it starts building the virtual machine for me and builds the application out. And we'll get into that in just a second. Let me make sure that this vCenter, yep, as you can see, it's cloning machine, and it's kicking that off. So while it's doing that, let me walk you through what actually happens. So we have this simple workflow here that you can easily use. What it does is it first goes ahead and kicks off a Jenkins build. And the Jenkins build makes sure that my code is correct. And how does it do that? Well, it goes ahead and pulls the latest build number, and then it spins up a brand new virtual machine, as you can see here. It clones the virtual machine, it stabilizes it because you need some time for it to kick off VMware Power Tools, as well as you need some time for that VM to bake and show up on the network appropriately. Once that is done, what we do is that we go ahead and tell it that I want to install apt-get update, all the latest packages, right? Because that way any patches that NetSec team is putting out, any patches that the OS team is putting out are being integrated. And then after that, I authenticate into it using root and that super secret password that everybody in the world knows, VMware one bang, right? And what that forces it to do is it forces it to go ahead and start installing all the underlay of the application that I need, right? So we talked about a node package manager having a database called Redis, so that happens there. And then right after that, it goes ahead and installs the server itself. So not just the client library for doing connection pooling, but the server. And then once that's done, it goes ahead and talks to the git clone repository that we talked about, right? So if you look at this particular command, you'll see it's actually going out to the public internet and pulling the code that I wanted it to push out, right? Fairly straightforward. And it grabs the latest demo runbook.git, and it switches to the root directory, and it starts installing it. Well, what happens when it really starts installing it? Well, the first thing that our workflows do is they go in and install the node package manager, as you can see here. And then once that's done, it goes ahead and installs the NPM itself, right? So it installs the Node.js engine so we can start running our application, and then installs the Node package manager so we can start managing it. And then once that's done, it goes ahead and fires up the application, Node.js, using app.js. And all I had to do as a developer was make a REST call to this workflow on my VRO server that you already own. And I just had to line up my GitHub specifically over here by specifying which Git repository to pull, right? And it figured out, reverse engineered all the other repository related information, all the other requirements. It spoke to apt-get and got everything pulled down appropriately, right? So as you can see, while that is being done, if you look at my workflow here, it's basically going through all of these items one at a time. For example, it's just gone through the run script and guest, and I bet you that's for, installing the Redis server. And if you look at the logs, you'll see all of the items that are going back and forth, right? So for example, in these logs, you can see that, we stabilized the VM, now we're installing all the packages, and now we're installing GitHub. And how does this actually turn out, right? Well, let me take you back to the other part of the house. So before we had this discussion today, what I was doing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon was just testing out to make sure, right? So as you can see, it's doing VMworld 2017. It's a brand new VM, and it's building it still, so I'm going to leave it alone. But before we started, I figured I kicked off another VM just in case this exact situation happened and my network was down or something like that. So if I go to this particular IP address that's been assigned, what you should see on port 3000 is basically our runbook. Okay, great. Whoops. Oh yeah, I had two. There we go. And that's what the runbook looks like, right? Which is I could start adding things. So I ordered some F5, I ordered info blocks, I updated the vSphere patch, for example, right? And it keeps track of things that I need. So that's how basically the application works. But what I wanted to show you mainly, and I hope you got the gist of it, is that all that magic was done just by invoking this particular workflow on a REST command. And on the other side of the house, all the developer had to do was check in the code, push it to Git, and make sure to remember the password when they're doing that, and have it be hosted. And you can trap that call easily, right? So that should show you, theoretically, what the end-to-end full life cycle looks like, right? This item that we talked about, this one. I'm not going to switch it back. I'm just tired of the HDMI here. But that's what, you should have seen in my demo, right? Which is the end-to-end life cycle that you see up here is being captured here using tools you already own, right? So any questions about how this actually works behind the scenes? Yes, sir?
So is this, is VRO, I'm not familiar with VRO, but is it intended to be a replacement for things like where we have Big Mac and with Ansible, or is it supplement? And what does it get called? And where in,
Yes, sir.
would I be using this? Is it initially?
Yep. Absolutely. So the questions were two things. One, which is, does VRO replace other configuration management like Ansible, Chef, Puppet, SaltStack, right? No, it does not. We work with it. We have lots of plugins, right, including Puppet, Chef, Ansible, and all these things, where we can actually call it at the right part of the lifecycle of a workload. If it's a virtual machine, or if it's a collection of virtual machines, or if it's a public cloud hosted VM, right? So we can definitely integrate with that. Now, the second question you'd asked, sir, was more about how does this play in the end-to-end ecosystem? How do you invoke it? So there are a couple of ways of invoking VRO. One is to set a SMTP trap, right, that catches to see, hey, is anybody submitting code into GitHub? And if that submission goes through correctly, or if Jenkins produces a brand new build, catch that as an SMTP trap, call this REST API, and kick off the workflow that builds the entire ecosystem. The second way to do it is through VRA. And VRA has a really good workflow engine in there called Event Broker, which basically manages the lifecycle of a virtual machine. And then depending on what part of the lifecycle it is at, it'll call the VRO instance you've specified for it, saying, I'm building a machine, go ahead and do this for me, like get an IP address. Or I'm building a machine and I need a brand new AD Windows administrator added, go ahead and do it. And VRO will do it for you. VRA will manage that lifecycle, but the actual worker is VRO, right? So that's the second way to do it. The third way to do it is just through a pure REST call. So if you're on curl or if you're on Postman or something like that, you can call a REST API and just pass it the right parameters, and then what it'll do is it'll trap that call and kick off the workflow that I'm just talking about. So hopefully that helps. Great. Yes, sir?
So you have a REST API listed. Does that mean I can submit the blueprint as code to REST API with parameters built into it as JSON and kick off the build, alter code, and then commit back?
Very good question. So The question was, can I just submit a JSON-based blueprint to you dynamically and have you kick it off, right? I'm guessing that's right. So there are two answers to this question. So one is yes, if you know what you're doing from an automation perspective at a depth, because what you're pointing out is a dynamic creation of a blueprint and then kicking that off. Yes, you can do that. You just have to get down to like a level 300 API to tell VRA, I'm giving you a blueprint, here are the custom properties, here are the allowed parameters, and once you've done that, come back to me and give me the reference ID for that blueprint, and I'm going to call that reference ID with the values for the custom properties that I just told you about. So that's one way to do it. The second way to do it is to say, I have a couple of different blueprints. For example, a normal customer will have 4 blueprints. Rel 6 something, Rel 7.2, Win12, Windows 2K12, and Windows 2K16. Yeah, you're laughing. I'm guessing you're familiar with this. So in that case, pick one of those blueprints, give me the reference ID, I'll give you what the custom properties are supposed to be, kick it off for me, right? So that's how you could do it. Beyond that, the last thing I wanted to mention was, you mentioned JSON. So there's some caveating there because VRA doesn't purely speak full JSON. We have some compatibility, we will work with it. It's just there are some weirdness, like you have to express the VMO ID in a specific way, or you have to express the vSAN storage that you want to deploy to in a specific way, right? So if you want to talk about that, we'll be more than happy to talk with you offline about it. Great, awesome. Other questions about how this magic actually happened behind the scenes? Okay, so while this is baking out, let's go back to our slide deck because I wanted to show you the 10 biggest things that you should take away from this discussion, right, from a takeaway perspective. So using my high-tech method again, I'm going to switch back to this projector and hope that it works. Oh man, come on, get in there. All right, there we go. Sometimes I just wonder, we're a big company with a lot of money. Why can't we just have 2 projectors, right? Be easy. All right, so we've talked about the demo, and if you want more details and depth of how it actually works, more than happy to show it to you, and I'll send you the YouTube video in case you want to show it to your management. More than happy to do that. There are 10 takeaways, that you should go with from this discussion, right? And feel free to take a snapshot of that. But it's pretty straightforward, which is what DevOps practices can you leverage to expedite service delivery and improve quality, right? Well, the first and foremost is keep that in mind that DevOps is not just a product practice, it's also an organizational practice, right? So you can't just buy it, like an upgrade on United to get into first class. You're going to have to not just buy the upgrade, but you're going to have to work towards it, right, with your whole organization. Beyond that, how can you use continuous integration for deployment of effective VMs? Well, you saw how we did it in workloads, right, and how we did it through VRO. So what you could do is engage VMware Professional Services to help you build out these workflows, as well as you can use the copies of those workflows and use VRO and VRA to build out this continuous integration pipeline that integrates with Jenkins, GitHub, SCCM, Perforce, you name it, right? So that way we've got everything end-to-end working correctly. The third point is, how do I use infrastructure as code and configurations as code to improve scalability? And that was the question that the gentleman asked, which is, how do I throw you a blueprint as code and you consume it? Well, you do that through VRA and VRO, right? You get your JSON-ified blueprint, you get JSON version of your configuration, for example, Ansible, or you get a configuration version of NSX from a REST NSXT perspective, and you throw that at VRA or you throw that at VRO, and we'll be able to spin it up as you need. The fourth point was, how do developers and operations team work together to manage software releases effectively? Well, we talked about that at the very beginning, right? Which is not just to throw the code over the fence, but to actually work on the same development pipeline. And how do you get that development pipeline? You use the developer framework as DevOps framework as a service that I showed you, right? Because that'll give you integrations into all these third-party ecosystems like GitHub and Jenkins. But it'll also give you an SSO platform that you can start using not just with VMware technologies like NSX, vSAN, or EUC, but with also third-party providers using the VRO hop that we talked about, right? Other point is that, what DevOps tools or practices can you help me learn and help me leverage in production? Well, we showed you that, right? And especially if, somebody in your company comes around and starts intimidating you with this, right, saying, hey, we have all these technologies, it's your job to integrate them and get me a DevOps pipeline, you can go back to them using this, saying, yeah, sure, we'll do it, as long as we can leverage the, VCF and VRO integrations that VMware offers, because then I can give you a DevOps pipeline as a service, and you can keep adding as many technologies as you want, right? Great. And then beyond that, we had a couple of different points to take away, which is, how do you leverage VMware skills to deliver DevOps? Well, I answered that question for you already, which is you have to hire VMware professional services, and we have a gigantic team across the entire planet who will be more than happy to do that for you, even as, just to get the ball rolling. Beyond that, which products can you help complete your DevOps service offering? Obviously, VRA, VRO, NSX, VCF, and very soon, as Pat mentioned, right, Amazon is a big part of our future as well. VMC and AWS, right? I've already started having conversations with customers on how do you build a DevOps pipeline that you can target, vSphere workloads on, but at the same time, then using custom properties, figure out that thing needs to go in this particular VPC or this AZ or this region in Amazon, and integrate both the VIDM part of our discussion with the IAM part of Amazon, so that way you have one consolidated pipeline for doing on-prem DevOps, as well as scale out if need be, or DR as a service to Amazon Web Services, right? So that's the other part of the offering. And then the other question I get typically is, what are the next steps that I can take to get started immediately? Well, it's pretty straightforward. If you haven't started working with VRA and VRO, do that already. You probably, I don't know if you guys know this, but VRO is a free product from VMware. Let me say that again. VRO is a free product from VMware. If you have a vCenter license, you have access to VRO, right? So go ahead and start firing that up, learn how to use VRO appropriately. There's a huge community of folks out there who can help you, especially the vcoteam.info folks. If you just want to know how to use it, go to vcoteam.info. We keep renaming our products, but we can't keep changing URLs. And the other thing you could do to be able to leverage this is basically go to some of these sessions, right? Here are the sessions that I'd recommend. You've already survived the DevOps deep dive, and I have to really apologize. I feel like the technical difficulties we had wasn't, prevented me from doing the 110% I wanted for you, but I think we made it through together. The other items that I'd definitely recommend is the designing application-centric infrastructure platform, as well as this one specifically, delivering infrastructure as code, right? It goes back to the question the gentleman asked, which is, how do I consume blueprints and essentially infrastructure, right? If it's an NSX switch, if it's a Cisco switch, if it's a VPC from AWS, if it's a vSAN node, right? How do I consume that as an infrastructure? Well, or as code. That's going to be discussed in DEV1517BU. So please definitely go and take a look at that. And then finally, if you can attend the V2353, which is the unpanel, we have about 250 people signed up for this right now. But I think that they're going to expand it to a much larger room, because that is a very popular topic. It's a free-for-all where everybody can come in and ask and answer, get questions answered from a panel of experts who are DevOps specific. And then finally, one that we haven't listed here, but what I'm doing on Wednesday, which is DevOps lessons from the real world. So I'm going to have 3 customers on stage with me who we've helped: Symantec Corporation, as well as Fannie Mae, the one who underwrites all of our mortgages. And then also Johnson & Johnson, right? The folks who make talcum powder as well as those Band-Aids. But they'll be on the stage with me. Yes, sir? 2740. Oh, okay. Sorry. 2704. All right. Let me just make that edit as well to make sure everybody's on the same page. All right. So yeah, we'll have all 3 of those customers on the panel, and I'm going to go ahead and have real-world discussions about what did it take for you to go from 0 to 60 in terms of delivering DevOps that is scalable, simple, as well as complex, right? Or complex as needed. So that's what I'd recommend. And then finally, I know I might regret saying this, but truth be told, it'd be great if you guys can go ahead and fill out your survey. Keep in mind that there were some technical challenges that I had to work with here. But please do fill it out, because every year we want to improve our demonstrations. Yes, sir. The one on Wednesday, sir, is, give me just 1 second and I'll have it. I'm surprised why the core team didn't put up mines. But it is DEV1519, DEV1519. It's on Wednesday at 1 o'clock in Oceanside D level 2. And it's got Symantec, J&J, and Fannie Mae along with me on there. Great. Other questions, folks? Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I apologize again for the delay, and have a great day.